It is not at all controversial to say that the characters in the show Game of Thrones were vastly different from their book counterparts, but what I think most people don't realize is just how much different they were, and more importantly, how their show selves impact the perception of their book selves. There are many factors that contribute to it, chief of which is the fact that a sizable portion of current book readers were introduced to the series by the show and never made a conscious effort to separate these two mediums. And even those who read the books first were heavily impacted by the show, since visual mediums simply have a stronger effect on our brains. For that reason, the issue of mixing up events from the books with those from the show is quite persistent, but what happens even more often, and usually unconsciously, is the mixing of the show and book characterization of characters, irrespective of surface-level claims that yeah, we know they are different. As such, over the last couple of months, I spent hours rewatching Daenerys Targaryen's scenes in Game of Thrones and comparing them to the books. Upon deeper analysis, I came to a conclusion that the often repeated mantra of the show was faithful to the books until season 5 is not applicable to her. She was a vastly different character already in season 2, if not in season 1, which is by far the most faithful to the books. But there are several key omissions and changes in it that, nonetheless, set the stage for later, much more glaring ones. And while it's understandable that the difference of mediums forced the showrunners to change and reimagine things, there were many instances where that was not a sufficient enough explanation. For instance, omissions of huge chunks of dialogue in favor of flat one-liners, especially in a show whose earlier seasons were characterized by pristine, elaborate dialogue. But what interested me the most in my long investigation was not that show Daenerys was different, but rather how the presence of these differences left some residues in how strictly book Daenerys is understood, discussed, and analyzed. The combined length of these videos is 9 hours, 32 minutes, and 4 seconds. And given how fucked everyone's attention span is these days, I realized that the best way to conclude this series is to take all of my findings and combine them in a shorter video, where I would talk about issues that were persistent in all 5 seasons, and that most heavily contributed to the issues I speak of. As such, this video can be watched as a standalone feature in case you have no time or will to sit through these 9.5 hours of content. But I, of course, encourage everyone to return to these longer videos for a fuller picture of the situation. We will start with smaller issues, working our way to the most serious ones, and for convenience, I will also be using clips from the previous videos, so that is yet another reason for you to go and see them in context. Please do it. Before we start, remember that if you like my content, like, subscribe and share so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video. Also, you can listen to this on Spotify if you prefer. Check the link in the description. The show Game of Thrones followed several storylines and had limited time to allocate to each and every one of them. In fact, this was one of the reasons why this story was so long believed to be unadaptable. The Westerosi storylines often overlapped, so it was not as big of a problem, but in the case of Daenerys, her isolation from the main plot posed some challenges. Daenerys spends 6 out of 8 seasons on another continent, immersed in different cultures that have different problems, starting with the Dothraki, then in Karcz, then in Slaver's Bay. As such, Daenerys' scenes are often what I would describe as choppy. They are randomly thrown in between scenes of other characters and tend to end somewhat abruptly. At the same time, there is little to no progression in her actual plot across numerous episodes, and that most often boils down to the large chunks of cut dialogue. This issue persists in every season. To name some examples, in Season 1, Episode 4, we have a scene of Dany and Viserys arguing and her physically resisting him. The scene cuts abruptly, even though it goes on for some time in the book. "Your supper is ready, Khaleesi," Jiqui announced. "I'm not hungry," Dany said sadly. She was suddenly very tired. "Share the food amongst yourselves and send some to Ser Jorah, if you would." After a moment she added, "Please bring me one of my dragon's eggs." Edie fetched the egg with the deep green shell, bronze flecks shining amid its scales as she turned it in her small hands. Dany curled up on her side, pulling the sunsilk cloak across her and cradling the egg in the hollow between her swollen belly and small tender breasts. She liked to hold them. They were so beautiful, and sometimes just being close to them made her feel stronger, braver, as if somehow she was drawing strength from the stone dragons locked inside. She was lying there, holding the egg, when she felt the child move within her, as if he were reaching out, brother to brother, blood to blood. "You are the dragon," Dany whispered to him. "The true dragon. I know it. I know it." And she smiled and went to sleep dreaming of home. In the same episode, but sometime later, Dany and Jorah discuss the fight, and Jorah informs her that the commoners actually pray for mundane things and not the return of the Targaryens. And then, once again, the scene ends abruptly. In Season 2, Dany's tenure in the Red Waste is extended to last 3 episodes, whereas in the books it is only 1 chapter. Here the most eventful omission is the stop the Khalasar makes in Vaes Toloro, an abandoned city in the Waste. Instead, we get a short scene of the Khalasar struggling in the desert, cut. Short scene of Rakaro's horse returning with his severed head, cut. Dany and her Khalasar begging to be let in, cut. If you cannot adapt Vaes Toloro due to location issues, then at the very least include some conversations Dany and Jorah have. For example, them discussing the Ness Hightower. In Season 3, Dany enters the picture in Episode 1 and has a short scene with Jorah on the ship, where they don't say anything of substance or importance to the plot beyond repeating what the audience already knows. Whereas in the books, we have these very long conversations about the dragons and Rhaegar. "Did you know my brother Rhaegar as well?" It was said that no man ever knew Prince Rhaegar, truly. I had the privilege of seeing him in tourney though, and often heard him play his harp with its silver strings. Ser Jorah snorted, along with 1,000 others at some harvest feast. "Next you will claim you squired for him." "I make no such claim, sir. Miles Mouton was Prince Rhaegar's squire, and Richard Lonmouth after him. When they won their spurs, he knighted them himself, and they remained his close companions. Young Lord Connington was dear to the prince as well, but his oldest friend was Arthur Dane." "The sword of the morning," said Dany, delighted. "Viserys used to talk about his wondrous white blade. He said Sir Arthur was the only knight in the realm who was our brother's peer." Whitebeard bowed his head. "It is not my place to question the words of Prince Viserys." "King," Dany corrected. "He was a king, though he never reigned. Viserys, the third of his name." "But what do you mean?" His answer had not been one that she'd expected. "Ser Jorah named Rhaegar the last dragon once. He had to have been a peerless warrior to be called that, surely." "Your Grace," said Whitebeard. "The Prince of Dragonstone was a most puissant warrior, but—" "Go on," she urged. "You may speak freely to me." "As you command." The old man leaned upon his hardwood staff, his brow furrowed. "A warrior without peer. Those are fine words, Your Grace, but words win no battles." "Swords win battles," Ser Jorah said bluntly, and Prince Rhaegar knew how to use them. Then he turned back to the squire. "I know little of Rhaegar, only the tales Viserys told, and he was a little boy when our brother died." "What was he truly like?" The old man considered a moment. "Able, that above all. Determined. Deliberate, dutiful, single-minded. There is a tale told of him. But doubtless Ser Jorah knows it as well." "I would hear it from you." "As you wish," said Whitebeard. "As a young boy, the Prince of Dragonstone was bookish to a fault. He was reading so early that men said Queen Rhaella must have swallowed some books and a candle whilst he was in her womb. Rhaegar took no interest in the play of other children. The maids were awed by his wits, but his father's knights would jest solely that Baelor the Blessed had been born again. Until one day Prince Rhaegar found something in his scrolls that changed him. No one knows what it might have been, only that the boy suddenly appeared early one morning in the yard as the knights were donning their steel. He walked up to Sir Willem Darry, the master-at-arms, and said, 'I will require sword and armor. It seems I must be a warrior.' And he was," said Dany, delighted. "He was indeed." Granted, in the show, Barristan hadn't joined the team yet, but the whole dialogue could have been given to Jorah instead. And while it's true that there was a limited time to allocate to Daenerys, the show did not shy away from including, for instance, repetitive scenes of Theon's torture at the hands of Ramsay, which in the books happens entirely off-screen. In Season 4, the biggest omission is the discussion Dany and Barristan have about Aerys, which only makes it to the show in Season 5, and that is already abridged and in a rather ill-fitting context. She turned to Sir Barristan. "You protected my father for many years. fought beside my brother on the trident, but you abandoned Viserys in his exile, and bent your knee to the usurper instead. Why? And tell it true. Some truths are hard to hear. Robert was, a good knight. Chivalrous, brave. He spared my life, and the lives of many others. Prince Viserys was only a boy. It would have been years before he was fit to rule, and forgive me, my queen, but you ask for truth. Even as a child, your brother Viserys oft seemed to be his father's son, in ways that Rhaegar never did. His father's son? Dany frowned. What does that mean? The old knight did not blink. Your father is called the Mad King in Westeros. Has no one ever told you? Viserys did. The Mad King. The usurper called him that. The usurper and his dogs. The Mad King. It was a lie. Why ask for truth? Ser Barristan said softly. If you close your ears to it. He hesitated, then continued. I told you before that I used a false name, so the Lannisters would not know that I'd joined you. That was less than half of it, your grace. The truth is, I wanted to watch you for a time, before pledging you my sword. To make certain that you were not my father's daughter. If she was not her father's daughter, who was she? Mad, he finished. But I see no taint in you. Taint? Dany bristled. I am no maester to quote history at you, your grace. Swords have been my life, not books. But every child knows that the Targaryens have always danced too close to madness. Your father was not the first. King Jaehaerys once told me that madness and greatness are two sides of the same coin. Every time a new Targaryen is born, he said, the gods toss the coin in the air, and the world holds its breath to see how it will land. Jaehaerys, this old man, knew my grandfather. The thought gave her pause. Most of what she knew of Westeros had come from her brother, and the rest from Ser Jorah. Ser Barristan would have forgotten more than the two of them had ever known. This man can tell me what I came from. So I am a coin in the hands of some god. Is that what you are saying, sir? No, Ser Barristan replied. You are the true-born heir of Westeros. To the end of my days, I shall remain your faithful knight, should you find me worthy to bear a sword again. If not, I am content to serve strong Belvas as his squire. What if I decide you're only worthy to be my fool? Dany asked scornfully. Or perhaps my cook. I will be honored, your grace, Sammy said with quiet dignity. I can bake apples and boiled beef as well as any man, and I've roasted many a duck over a campfire. I hope you like them greasy, with charred skin and bloody bones. That made her smile. I would have to be mad to eat such fare. Ben Plum, come give Ser Barristan your longsword, but Whitebird would not take it. I flung my sword at Joffrey's feet and have not touched one since. Only from the hand of my queen will I accept the sword again. As you wish. Dany took the sword from Brown Ben and offered it hilt first. The old man took it reverently. Now kneel, she told him, and swear it to my service. Like I said, the showrunners shot themselves in the foot when they didn't bother to have Barristan wear a disguise. It robbed us of yet another strong scene that would have improved the pacing, as well as Barristan only choosing to serve Dany after he saw her for himself. Dany dismisses everyone, but Barristan stays behind, and they have this conversation.
Your Grace, a word, please, I beg you.
About what?
About your father. About the Mad King.
The Mad King? You're here to remind me of my enemy's lies? Consider me reminded.
Your Grace, I served in his King's Guard. I was at his side from the first. Your enemies did not lie.
Go on.
When the people rose in revolt against him, your father set their towns and castles aflame. He murdered sons in front of their fathers. He burned men alive with wildfire and laughed as they screamed. And his efforts to stamp out dissent led to a rebellion that killed every Targaryen, except two.
I'm not my father.
No, Your Grace. Thank the gods. But the Mad King gave his enemies the justice he thought they deserved. And each time it made him feel powerful and right until the very end.
I will not have the son of the Harpy executed without a fair trial.
For such a short scene, there's a lot of layers here, and I will love nothing more than to shred them all to pieces. First thing I want to note is how hollow this conversation is compared to the one Barristan and Daenerys have in A Storm of Swords. What contributed most to it was the dropping of Barristan's disguise as Arstan, and the fact that he observed Daenerys before he revealed himself, having concluded that Dany is most certainly not like Aerys. Here, however, he still has that thinly veiled presumption that there's something wrong with Dany and he needs to warn her against letting herself become like Aerys. In season 5, we are meant to believe that Missandei is Dany's closest friend and advisor, but they barely interact with each other. In many of the episodes of season 5, Natalie Emmanuel doesn't even have a speaking role, even though in the books, Dany and Missandei regularly talk, both privately and publicly. Dany and Missandei, who are supposed to be best friends, don't talk in the show. They talk in the books, however. When he was gone, Missandei brought the queen a simple meal of goat cheese and olives, with raisins for a sweet. Your grace needs more than wine to break her fast. You are such a tiny thing, and you will surely need your strength today. That made Daenerys laugh, coming from a girl so small. She relied so much on the little scribe that oft forgot that Missandei had only turned 11. They shared the food together on her terrace. As Dany nibbled on an olive, the nappy girl gazed at her with eyes like molten gold and said, "It is not too late to tell them that you have decided not to wed." It is though, the queen thought, sadly. Hizdahr's blood is ancient and noble. Our joining will join my freedmen to his people. When we become as one, so will our city. Your grace does not love the noble Hizdahr. This one thinks you would sooner have another for your husband. I must not think of Daria today. A queen loves where she must, not where she will. Thus, the issue of the stray spacing cannot be fully explained by Dany's separation from the rest of the cast. The fault lies first and foremost with the scriptwriters, because the biggest contributor to this is a chronic issue of cutting dialogue. The sad reality is that Daenerys isn't really allowed to speak in her own story, even though Game of Thrones shone the brightest when it consisted of dialogue lifted wholesale from the books. In Dany's storyline, that is not the case. She mostly speaks in one-liners or listens to what other people have to say. When rewatching Dany's scenes in the show, I had a consistent impression that she isn't really a lead of her own story, but rather shares her spotlight with numerous co-leads, to the point that some of her lines from the books have been given to other characters, most notably to Jorah Mormont.
No one will take my dragons.
They're too weak to fight. As are your people. You must be their strength.
As you are mine.
This is a very weird instance of Jorah being given Dany's internal monologue from the books. They left a trail of dead and dying horses behind them as they went, for Pono, Jacko and the others had seized the best of Drogo's herds, leaving to Dany the old and the scrawny, the sickly and the lame, the broken animals and the ill-tempered. It was the same with the people. They are not strong, she told herself, so I must be their strength. I must show no fear, no weakness, no doubt. However frightened my heart, when they look upon my face, they must see only Drogo's queen. She felt older than her 14 years. If ever she had truly been a girl, that time was done. Dany kissed him lightly on the cheek. It hurt her to see him smile. I must be strong for him as well, she thought grimly. A knight he may be, but I am the blood of the dragon. Daenerys is strength to everyone, including Jorah. Dany cannot rely on him, she must be strong for him as well. This is not something that can be only relayed in the internal monologue. Why not have her say, yeah, I must be strength for these people, no matter what happens, and instead give this assertion to Jorah, and her somehow needing to rely on him in turn? Just ridiculous. This is especially outrageous given the already established issue of removal of dialogue. Supporting characters in Dany's story would often get extra scenes at her expense. For example, in season 1, when the altercation between Jorah and Viserys is shown to us, rather than just spoken about later, and the scene between Viserys and Doria. So, we have no time for Dothraki lore and culture, but for some unknown reason, Cripples, Bastards and Broken Things continues with the pattern of adding puzzling scenes not present in the source material at the expense of truly important scenes from the book. Dany's 2 dragon dreams were not included, but the showrunners found the space for girl-on-girl action in the previous episodes, as well as a completely random scene of Doria and Viserys bathing and having sex in Vaes Dothrak, as they give us exposition about dragons. You know, the exposition that should rightfully instead be included in Dany's dragon dreams. The scene is also not necessary as an establishment of Viserys' impulsivity and mad swings, because we already know he is mentally unstable. Later, once more, the show follows the pattern of giving scenes to other characters at Dany's expense, this time with Viserys trying to steal her eggs. an event that is only referenced by Jorah later.
Don't let them see you carrying a sword in Vy's Dothrak. You know the law.
It's not my law.
They don't belong to you.
Whatever is hers is also mine.
Once, perhaps.
If I sell one egg, I'll have enough to buy a ship. 2 eggs, a ship, and an army.
And you have all 3.
I need a large army. I'm the last hope of a dynasty, Mormon. The greatest dynasty this world has ever seen on my shoulders since I was 5 years old. And no one has ever given me what they gave to her in that tent. Never. Not a piece of it. How can I carry what I need to carry without it? Who can rule without wealth or fear or love? You stand there all nobility and honor. You don't think I see you looking at my little sister? Don't think I know. I don't care. You can have. She can be queen of the suffrages and dine in the finest bloody horse parts, and you can dine in whichever parts of her you like. But let me go.
You can go. You can't have the eggs.
You swore an oath to me. Does loyalty mean nothing to you?
It means everything to me.
And yet here you stand.
And yet here I stand.
That at the expense of other pivotal scenes in the books, like, for example, Daenerys explaining to Drogo the reasoning behind their child's name. What is meaning? Name Rhaego. Khal Drogo asked as they walked, using the common tongue of the 7 kingdoms. She had been teaching him a few words when she could. Drogo was quick to learn when he put his mind to it, though his accent was so thick and barbarous that neither Ser Jorah nor Viserys could understand a word he said. My brother Rhaegar was a fierce warrior, my sun and stars, she told him. He died before I was born. Ser Jorah says that he was the last of the dragons. Khal Drogo looked down at her. His face was a copper mask, yet under the long black moustache, dropping beneath the weight of its gold rings, she thought she glimpsed the shadow of a smile. His good name, Daenerys' wife, moon of my life, he said. That is not to say that the supporting cast is not important. It is, in every storyline, but I do not recall supporting characters in other plots being given this much weight in comparison to the leads, and at their expense at that. Nor do I recall supporting characters being drastically changed, the way Jorah Mormont was, and having the supporting cast utter the lines originally belonging to the main character. I say at the expense because it often wound up drastically altering Dany's characterization. By making Jorah far more important than he is in the books and a great guy, Dany's empathy gets downplayed. But by far the most outrageous change thus far is show Dany's later reaction to the Unsullied training.
8,000 dead babies.
Unsullied are a means to an end.
Once I own them, these men...
They're not men. Not anymore.
Once I own an army of slaves, what will I be?
Do you think these slaves will have better lives serving Krasnus and men like him or serving you?
As I might remind you, in the show, the ship is on the way to Astapor. In the books, 3 ships sail to Pentos, and it's Jorah who convinces Dany to deter to Astapor, to which she is apprehensive at first. Because of this, Dany and Jorah do not have an argument about it, and Dany's reaction to the horrors she had just heard about is far weaker. Compare and contrast with how Dany feels about the situation in the books. How many men do they have for sale? None. Was it Mormont she was angry with? Or this city with its sullen heat, its stinks and sweats and crumbling bricks? They sell eunuchs, not men. Eunuchs made of brick, like the rest of Astapor. Shall I buy 8,000 big eunuchs with dead eyes that never move, who kill suckling babes for the sake of a spiked hat and strangle their own dogs? They don't even have names. So, don't call them men, sir. Khaleesi, he said, taken aback by her fury. The Unsullied are chosen as boys and trained. I have heard all I care to of their training. Then you could feel tears welling in her eyes, sudden and unwanted. Her hand flashed up and cracked Ser Jorah across the face. It was either that or cry. Mormont touched the cheek she slapped. If I have displeased my queen, you have. You have displeased me greatly, sir. If you were my true knight, you would never have brought me to this vile sty. If you were my true knight, you would never have kissed me, or looked at my breasts the way you did, or... As your grace commands, I shall tell Capitan Groleo to make ready to sail on the evening tide, for some style less vile. No, said Dany. Groleo watched them from the forecastle, and his crew was watching too. Whitebird, her blood riders, Jiqui, everyone had stopped what they were doing at the sound of the slap. I want to sail now, not on the tide. I want to sail far and fast and never look back. But I can't, can I? There are 8,000 big eunuchs for sale, and I must find some way to buy them. And with that, she left him and went below. Dany's military strategies were also given to other characters, removing her intelligence and military prodigy. In the reigns of Castamir, Dany, Jorah, Barristan, Grey Worm, and the newly joined member of her entourage, Daario, discussed plans for the attack on Yunkai.
Where?
There.
There. It's a back gate. My men use it when they visit Yunkai's bed slaves.
Your men, but not you.
I have no interest in slaves. A man cannot make love to property. This is where we enter the city. Very few guards, they know me. They let me inside.
You're not going to sneak an army through a back gate.
I kill the guards. I take your 2 best men and lead them through the back streets, which I know well, and open the front gates. Then comes the army. Once the walls are breached, the city will fall in hours.
Or perhaps you lead Grey Worm and me to the slaughter, cutting the head off our army. The masters of Yunkai will pay you your fee and you won't have to split it 3 ways because you've already slaughtered your partners.
You have a very suspicious mind. In my experience, only dishonest people think this way.
You command the Unsullied. What do you think?
Logenton mire numaz me isa. Iderena kopsa verdagon isa.
Odaban, squadras, trezikido.
You leave tonight?
Very good. We'll prepare.
The most egregious thing about it is that in the books, Daenerys herself devises the plan to attack Yunkai, showing her great strategic ability, especially for someone who was never formally educated. An hour past midnight should be time enough. Yes, Khaleesi, said Rakero. Time for what? To mount our attack. Sir Jorah Mormont scowled. You told the sellswords that I wanted their answers on the morrow. I made no promises about tonight. The Stormcrows will be arguing about my offer. The Second Sons will be drunk on the wine I gave Mero. And the Yunkai believe they have 3 days. We will take them under cover of this darkness. They will have scouts watching for us. And in the dark, they will see hundreds of campfires burning, said Dany. If they see anything at all. Khaleesi, said Drogo. I will deal with these scouts. They are no riders, only slavers on horses. Just so, she agreed. I think we should attack from 3 sides. Grey Worm, your Unsullied shall strike at them from right and left, while my cause lead my horse in wedge for a thrust through their center. Slave soldiers will never stand before mounted Dothraki. She smiled. To be sure, I am only a young girl and know little of war. What do you think, my lords? I think you are Rhaegar Targaryen's sister, Ser Jorah said with a rueful half-smile. Aye, said Arslan Whitebird. And a queen as well. The show makes the entire strategy Dario's idea, and Dany's only purpose in this scene is to nod along, translate for Grey Worm, and get subtly wooed by Daario. Jorah's suspicions are once more shown as somewhat reasonable, since Dany has too many hots for Daario to be able to judge his character for herself, and she needs reasonable men to make their judgment for her. And apparently, showrunners cannot imagine a woman having good strategic abilities, it has to be men that come up with the attack. This also continues the pattern of downplaying her importance in her own story. Notice how in this scene she only has 4 short lines. Where, you are a leader now, do you trust him, and you live tonight. While Jorah and Daario engage in a long conversation as she watches in silence. That becomes even more outrageous when you see another pattern. How almost all male supporting characters in Dany's story have the singular purpose of reining her impulses and explaining things to her. That is evident in the characterization of Jorah, Barristan, and later Tyrion. 3.
Growing fast.
Not fast enough. I can't wait that long. I need an army.
Will be an ass to pour by knife. Some say the Unsullied are the greatest soldiers in the world.
The greatest slave soldiers in the world. Distinction means a good deal to some people.
Do those people have any better ideas about how to put you on the Iron Throne?
It's too beautiful a day to argue.
You're right. Another lovely day in the high seas.
Don't mock them. They're the first Dothraki who've ever been on a ship. They followed me across the poison water. If they'll do it, others will, and with a true kirialiaart.
The Dothraki followed strength above all, Khaleesi. You'll have a true kirialiaart when you prove yourself strong, and not before.
I don't think Dany needs to be reminded that the Dothraki follow only strength. I also don't see her book counterpart just snapping her Jorah like that, and getting convinced that she could get some kirialiaart behind her just like that. Most of the Dothraki would be against her as well. Khal Drogo's claws led kirialiaarts of their own now, and none of them would hesitate to attack her own little band on sight, to slay and enslave her people, and drag Dany herself back to Vaes Dothrak to take her proper place among the withered crowns of the Doshkalim. The revolt turns out to be a success, but the glorious moment would soon be undercut by Daenerys doing her big, madness foreshadowing moment of crucifying the slavers of Meereen in retaliation for their crucifixion of 163 children. Daenerys faces opposition from Barristan, which she cannot voice in the books since she hadn't yet made amends with him, but he is not seen referencing the poor, innocent slavers in later conversations, nor in his POV in Dance, so we can assume that book Barristan did not care. Barristan's opposition is there because the showrunners don't believe that Daenerys should have done this, which will become evident once Hizdahr comes into the picture, and once the showrunners have Tyrion compare poor innocent slavers to Holocaust victims. Most of the fandom follows through, claiming that this act proves that she is biologically wired towards madness.
And why are you worth meeting? Why should I spend my time listening to you?
Because you cannot build a better world on your own. You have no one at your side who understands the land you want to rule, the strengths and weaknesses of the houses that will either join or oppose you.
I will have a very large army and very large dragons.
Killing and politics aren't always the same thing.
Normally, it would be indicative of something good that Dany is willing to listen to others, and some characters even compliment her for that. But this makes Daenerys seem both impulsive and indecisive. A consistent pattern in some scenes was as follows. Daenerys wants to destroy everything on her path, a rational man talks her out of it, and she concedes. This makes Daenerys not an active participant in her own story, but an object in need to be controlled by smarter characters. All while in the books, she is very self-reflective, and knows when she should trust herself, and when she should, instead, turn to other people. The show Game of Thrones decided very early to tone down fantastical elements in favor of making it a political drama with dragons. The central theme of the adaptation was the struggle for the throne, not the existential threat to all humanity, as exemplified by changing the title and reversing the final storylines in Season 8. The characters of Bran and Daenerys were impacted the most, since they have the most magical storylines. In the case of Dany, the following magical elements were removed. All of her dragon dreams were omitted. These 3 dreams that happen respectively in Daenerys 2, Daenerys 3 and Daenerys 9 A Game of Thrones are crucial towards her piecing the clues towards waking dragons from stone. There are no more dragons, Dany thought, staring at her brother, though she did not dare say it aloud. Yet that night she dreamt of one. Viserys was hitting her, hurting her. She was naked, clumsy with fear. She ran from him, but her body seemed thick and ungainly. He struck her again. She stumbled and fell. "You woke the dragon," he screamed as he kicked her. "You woke the dragon, you woke the dragon." Her thighs were slick with blood. She closed her eyes and whimpered. As if in answer, there was a hideous ripping sound and the crackling of some great fire. When she looked again, Viserys was gone. Great columns of flame rose all around, and in the midst of them was the dragon. It turned its great head slowly. When its molten eyes found hers, she woke, shaking and covered with a fine sheen of sweat. She had never been so afraid, until the day of her wedding came at last. Yet when she slept that night, she dreamt the dragon dream again. Viserys was not in it this time. There was only her and the dragon. Its scales were black as night, wet and slick with blood. Her blood, Dany sensed. Its eyes were pools of molten magma, and when it opened its mouth, the flame came rolling out in a hot jet. She could hear it singing to her. She opened her arms to the fire, embraced it, let it swallow her whole, let it cleanse her and temper her and score her clean. She could feel her flesh sear and blacken and slot away, could feel her blood boil and turn to steam, and yet there was no pain. She felt strong and new and fierce. And the next day, strangely, she did not seem to hurt quite so much. It was as if the gods had heard her and taken pity. Even her handmaids noticed the change. "Khaleesi," Jigby said, "what is wrong? Are you sick?" "I was," she answered, standing over the dragon's eggs that Telerio had given her when she wed. She touched one, the largest of the 3, running her hand lightly over the shelf. Black and scarlet, she thought, like the dragon in my dream. The stone felt strangely warm beneath her fingers. Or was she still dreaming? She pulled her hand back nervously. From that hour onward, each day was easier than the one before it. Wings shadowed her fevered dreams. "You don't want to wake the dragon, do you?" She was walking down a long hall, beneath high stone arches. She could not look behind her, must not look behind her. There was a door ahead of her, tiny with distance, but even from afar, she saw that it was painted red. She walked faster, and her bare feet left bloody footprints on the stone. "You don't want to wake the dragon, do you?" She saw sunlight on the Dothraki Sea, the living plain, rich with the smells of earth and death. Wind stirred the grasses, and they rippled like water. Drogo held her in strong arms, and his hands stroked her sex, and opened her and woke the sweet wetness that was his alone, and the stars smiled down on them, stars in a daylight sky. Home, she whispered as he entered her, and filled her with his seed. But suddenly the stars were gone, and across the blue sky swept the great wings, and the world took flame. Don't want to wake the dragon, do you? Ser Jorah's face was drawn and sorrowful. Rhaegar was the last dragon, he told her. He warmed translucent hands over a glowing brazier, when stone eggs smoldered red as coals. One moment he was there, and the next he was fading, his flesh colorless, less substantial than the wind. The last dragon, he whispered, thin as a wisp, and was gone. She felt the dark behind her, and the red door seemed farther away than ever. Don't want to wake the dragon, do you? Viserys stood before her, screaming. The dragon does not beg, slut. You do not command the dragon. I am the dragon, and I will be crowned. The molten gold trickled down his face like wax, burning deep channels in his flesh. I am the dragon, and I will be crowned. He shrieked, and his fingers snapped like snakes, biting at her nipples, pinching, twisting, even as his eyes burst and ran like jelly, down seared and blackened cheeks. Don't want to wake the dragon. The red door was so far ahead of her, and she could feel the icy breath behind, sweeping up on her. If it caught her, she would die a death that was more than death, howling forever alone in the darkness. She began to run. Don't want to wake the dragon. She could feel the heat inside her, a terrible burning in her womb. Her son was tall and proud, with Drogo's copper skin, and her own silver gold hair, violet eyes shaped like almonds. And he smiled for her, and began to lift his hand towards hers, but when he opened his mouth the fire poured out. She saw his heart burning through his chest, and in an instant he was gone, consumed like a moth by a candle, turned to ash. She wept for her child, the promise of a sweet mouth on her breast, and her tears turned to steam as they touched her skin. Want to wake the dragon. Ghosts lined the hallway, dressed in the faded raiment of kings. In their hands were swords of pale fire. They had hair of silver, and hair of gold, and hair of platinum white, and their eyes were opal and amethyst, tourmaline and jade. Faster, they cried. Faster, faster. She raced, her feet melting the stone wherever they touched. Faster, the ghosts cried as one. And she screamed and threw herself forward. A great knife of pain ripped down her back, and she felt her skin tear open, and smelled the stench of burning blood, and saw the shadow of wings. And Daenerys Targaryen flew. Wake the dragon. The door loomed before her. The red door. So close, so close. The hull was a blur around her, the cold receding behind. And now the stone was gone, and she flew across the Dothraki Sea, high and higher, the green ripple beneath, and all that lived and breathed fled in terror from the shadow of her wings. She could smell home. She could see it. There, just beyond that door, green fields and great stone houses, and arms to keep her warm. There. She threw open the door. The dragon. And saw her brother Rhaegar, mounted on a stallion as black as his armor. Fire glimmered red through the narrow eye slit of his helm. The last dragon, Ser Jorah's voice whispered faintly. The last, the last. Then he lifted his polished black visor. The face within was her own. These are substituted by Dany looking ponderously at her eggs. In season 2, Dany does mention that she dreamed that if she carried the eggs to the Great Pyre, they would hatch, but that is deeply unsatisfying compared to the books. First, because of show don't tell. Secondly, her dreams were far more symbolic and nebulous than that, making her feat of figuring it all out all that more impressive. Quaithe appears in season 2 and she and Daenerys never interact. Instead, she shares her scenes with Jorah, doesn't even bother to mention that the birth of dragons caused the return of magic, and then disappears from the rest of the story, even though she is present in it well into A Dance with Dragons. Another dream was omitted from season 3, the one where Dany dreams of herself as Rhaegar battling the army armored in ice on Dragonback. That night she dreamt that she was Rhaegar, riding to the Trident. But she was mounted on a dragon, not a horse. When she saw the usurpers' rebel host across the river, they were armored all in ice, but she bathed them in dragon fire, and they melted away like dew, and turned the Trident into a torrent. Some small part of her knew that she was dreaming, but another part exulted. This is how it was meant to be. The other was a nightmare, and I have only now awakened. The visions in the House of the Undying were egregiously cut in favor of some big nothing that was later retconned as foreshadowing, a change that annoyed me so much that I decided to adapt this chapter by myself to prove that one person with no production experience or professional gear can do a better job. Given the scope of A Song of Ice and Fire, simplification of certain storylines was inevitable. Some of the decisions pertaining to that were good. Others, not so much. The two notable instances of that happening was dropping Barristan's disguise as Arstan Whitebird, and basically everything that happened in Slaver's Bay in Season 5. Let us focus on the latter. The biggest problem with Season 5 is the fact that there is no conflict. It's one thing to make this extremely complex and delicate storyline more digestible for the general audience and for the purposes of the visual medium, but the showrunners accidentally removed everything significant from it. While the problems Dany faces in the books are complex and not confined to Meereen alone, the conflict there is in fact very simple. She ends slavery in Meereen and the natives resist her at every opportunity by murdering and torturing the freedmen, choosing those who serve her, become too outspoken or too prosperous to send a message. This is what happens when you get out of line. Some characters believe that this resistance movement, called the Sons of the Harpy, are orchestrated and managed from above by the nebulous figure of the Harpy. His Dar Zolorak, a Meereenese nobleman, offers to negotiate with the Harpy to stop these killings in exchange for Dany's hand in marriage and the possession of her consort, and largely succeeds in this task. This is very simple to adapt. You have the conflict and logical causation effect to stop it, while also embodying the human heart in conflict with itself, as well as a poignant question: how much is Dany willing to give up for the sake of peace? Well, it so happens that the show never once asks itself this question, because another conflict that was removed from the show is her conflict with herself. Because by Season 5 the showrunners are already fully committed towards making Dany more of a stone statue than a person, from beginning to end she is unwavering and unwilling to compromise, which significantly cheapens her efforts in Meereen. On the surface, the conflict in Meereen is there. There are some murders of the freedmen, but the violence of the Sons of the Harpy more so resembles random acts of violence than anything organized and with a goal in mind. Nor does it seem like these murders happen every night. His Dar too is not the guarantee of peace and is reduced to a punching bag, and Daenerys randomly decides to marry him after she almost kills him on a whim. What is given far more weight in this storyline is the fighting pits problem. Everyone and their mama wants to reopen them, and Dany resists solely for the sake of resisting. This makes for an exhausting and repetitive back and forth between Dany and his Dar. The issue of the fighting pits was simply not enough to carry this storyline, and while simplification was understandable, too much was simplified and made this storyline a chore to deal with. I recall that the fall of Astapor is mentioned by the end of Season 4, but it seems like it's all but forgotten by the narrative in Season 5, as nobody mentions it and Dany does not deal with the refugee crisis and a plague that results from it. In the books, the revolution spread all over Essos, and other slave-based polities declare war on Dany on the sole basis of her threatening their beloved system. For example, Karcz, which is forgotten by the show's narrative after Season 2. In the books, the peace in Yunkai is agreed on only if they are allowed to remain a slave city, whereas in the show, his Dar is able to travel there, establish a council of freedmen and the former masters, with Dany as their highest authority. And I'm supposed to believe that the Yunkishmen just agreed to share the rule with former slaves and have Dany, someone they deeply hate and despise, as their overlord. We do not even have scenes of Dany holding court or passing taxes. It really becomes all about the fighting pits. Like I said, some simplifications were inevitable, but swinging in the opposite direction robbed this storyline of any meaningful weight. Sorry, but I don't give a fuck about these fighting pits. The supporting cast in Game of Thrones was often just as important in carrying out the narrative as the main cast, and as much beloved as the main players. King's Landing had Varys and Littlefinger, and later the ever-iconic Olenna. The Wall had other Night's Watch members like Pip, Sam and Gran, and so on. And it was, to a degree, true to Daenerys as well, but the issue in her storyline specifically is that most of the characters from her storyline were cut, killed off, or significantly changed, and often for no good reason at all. Broadly, you can differentiate four main patterns with how the supporting cast in Dany's story were treated by the narrative. Category 1. Kept intact. They were adapted on screen more or less the same as they are in the books, with minor changes that do not affect the storyline all too much. Category 2. cut. These characters either never made it to screen or were removed from the story prematurely, with no good explanation. Category 3. Killed off. These characters die in the show while they live in the books. Category 4. Changed significantly. These characters were adapted, but altered to the point that they do not resemble their book selves anymore. The last two categories sometimes overlap, but I decided on the placement based on the relevance to the narrative. Let me put them in a calc table because I do not have a Microsoft Word license. I use LibreOffice and actually write my scripts in Google Doc. Mind your business. Okay, so let me quickly explain why this table looks the way it does. So, Drogo, Viserys, Miri, and Krasnus are more or less the same and serve similar purposes in the narrative. I put Grey Worm here because, while his storyline and role in the story was expanded, he nonetheless is quite faithfully adapted, and I actually like that his story was adapted because I love Jacob Anderson so much. So I put him here. And now the biggest category is cut, and let me explain myself. So Illyrio technically appears in the show, but there's no Varys and Illyrio conspiracy, even though I recall that in season 1 we do have scenes of him and Varys talking like underground when Arya overhears them. So I decided to put him in cut, and the same with Jiqui, because she appears in one scene and then disappears without a trace. So while they technically appeared in the show, they just did not have the same significance and were just forgotten by the narrative. The same with Ago, Rakaro, and Jogo. Only Rakaro was adapted. I should actually put Rakaro in Killed Off. Yeah, let me put Rakaro in Killed Off instead. Rakaro was killed off, but Jogo and Ago never made it to screen. There were some Blood Riders, but the issue here is that they just disappeared for no reason. There's Cavaro and unnamed Blood Rider in season 2, but they never appear again in season 2, so that's why. Quaif, the same as with the others. She technically appeared in the show, but as you might remember, she never really interacted with Daenerys, and she never appeared after season 2. So she was basically there for no reason. We don't have like 90% of her prophecies that, in A Storm of Swords, Quaif appeared, and in A Dance with Dragons, Quaif also appeared, but in the show she never really interacted with Daenerys in any way, and she never really did not make any substantial contribution to the narrative. That's why I put her in the cut category. Strong Belfast was obviously cut, Brown Ben Plum was obviously cut, Reznak and Skahas were obviously cut, Galaza was obviously cut, and Quentin was also obviously cut. Iri was obviously killed off in season 2 by Doria, and we will get to Doria in a second. And Barristan Salmi, I was wondering whether I should put him in changed or killed off. But eventually I decided that killed off is more important in this particular instance. Like I said, some of these people you could technically put in both of these categories, but I decided to pick the one where it's more important to the overall narrative and the storyline that this happened or this happened. So in the case of Barristan, it's obviously more important that he was killed off. Because of this, he did not have character development, he did not have he did not break the peace in Meereen, and basically, if you removed him from the narrative, nothing would have changed. You could have given his lines to someone else and it would not change anything. The same with Xaro, because while he was changed, I think it's more significant that he was killed off in season 2, because as you know, in season 2, Dany locked him and Doria in some vault, but in the books he's still alive, and he comes to Daenerys in Meereen in A Dance with Dragons, and Karv declares war on Daenerys when she refuses to leave Meereen. So I think killed off is more important in this instance, especially because, madness foreshadowing that never happened in the books. And yeah, Rakara was killed off while he lives in the books. So now the changed part. Jorah obviously was changed very strongly. Like, all of a sudden, he was not a groomer and a PDF file, and he was just, a devoted man, which is, it's still weird in the context of the show, because, technically, Show Daenerys is in universe considered an adult, because she starts this story at 16 years old. He is still so much older than she is, so that's still fucking weird. And Doria, obviously Doria dies in the books, but the manner of death is very different. And we discussed Doria, I think, on 2 separate occasions, where she was made into this seductress of sorts, which is the pattern of how sexual slavery was portrayed on the screen. And obviously, Doria was complicit in stealing Dany's dragons, and she killed Irri, and the Mad Queen locked her in a vault. So obviously, that's why I put her in the change category. Missandei, obviously, she was aged up. But that's not the only problem that is there with Missandei, because in the books, Missandei is like 10, 11. In the show, she is an adult woman. But in the books, Missandei advises Daenerys on taxes. Missandei advises Daenerys on like cultural practices. Missandei is very much an active member of Dany's court, whereas in the show, she just stands next to Daenerys, and we are meant to believe that they are besties, even though they barely talk. So obviously changed here. Daario Naharis, did he change? I was not sure if I should leave him in kept intact or changed, because as of now we don't know what is going to happen to Daario. And we did not venture into season 6. Because in season 6, it becomes very apparent that Daario was changed. In the show as of now, within these, season 3, season 4, season 5, Daario is kinda like his book counterpart, but the issue here is that in season 6, Daario basically says that he loves Daenerys as a person. Well, this is very much not the case in the books, where he just loves her crown, so I decided to put him there. And Hizdar Zolorak, of course, is in the change category. This is another case in which you could put him in killed off. Because Hizdar is still alive in the books, and but I decided that changed is more important because it contributes to the narrative more. He's their abused husband, basically. The most important thing here is that Hizdar is a regent. To me, it's clear that Hizdar had something to do with the poisoning of the locusts. And even if not, Hizdar and Galaza are definitely working together. So Barristan deposing him was a right move. And because Barristan was killed, Hizdar basically was left doing nothing. I'm still puzzled by the change of killing Hizdar, because I feel like this was a last-minute decision, because as you might recall this conversation they had in the fighting pit, when Tyrion says something like, "My father would have liked you." I felt like that scene was setting him up for being that regent of Meereen, but for whatever reason, maybe they wanted to just rid of him so that Missandei and Grey Worm can rule Meereen, and Tyrion, of course, can rule Meereen in Dany's absence, which I think was a bad idea. I think it would have made for a better conflict if they were just, if there was a faction, like the Queen's party and the King's party in Meereen during season 6 definitely would have improved a lot of things in Meereen's storyline, but I'm not a screenwriter, so maybe I'm wrong. So let's count this out. So in total we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 characters. Of those, 5 were basically kept intact, 11 were cut. 11 were cut one way or another, 4 were killed off, and 5 were changed. So, out of 25 characters that I decided to list here, only 5 of them kept their book personality, qualities, and role in the narrative, and 20 of them did not. I don't think I have to offer a comment here, because in order to have a point of comparison, I would have to rewatch the entire show and make such comparison between other supporting characters in other storylines, but I think it's still pretty damning that so much was removed. I do not deny that there is some fault in George, because, some of those characters are not as well developed as supporting cast in other storylines, but in a lot of these instances, there was just no excuse. Like, there was no excuse for changing Jorah. There was no excuse for changing Doria. There was no excuse in changing Missandei and Hizdar. There was no reason to kill Irri. There was, reason to kill Rakara because, as you may recall, the actor was going to leave anyway. There was no reason to kill Xaro. There was no reason to kill Barristan. There was no reason to kill Irri. And from Amrita, we actually have a confirmation that this did not have to happen. They just decided to kill her off. The casting of Illyrio is obviously there because they decided to drop Fagon's storyline. Jiqui, I have no idea why she was just in one scene. I guess they just merged her with Iri. The Blood Riders, obviously the issue here is that the Dothraki culture is all but dropped in season 3 onwards, when in the books Daenerys, she still wears a braid. The bells were cut from the show, and also the braid aspect was cut from the show for some reason. And Quaif stops appearing, Belvas is just cut, Brown Ben Plum is just cut, Reznak is cut, Skahas is cut, Galaza is cut, and Quentin is cut. Like, you could technically cut Reznak, but Skahas and Galaza, without them, the Mirin storyline doesn't work. Plain and simple. So, yeah, that's how it looks like. I think it's just a bummer. They were so disinterested in that storyline, it's not even funny. Even if you have problems with how George wrote some of these characters, nothing stops you from fleshing them out. Like Grey Worm, he was fleshed out. Jorah was somewhat, I guess, fleshed out. So there's no excuse in my head. That's how it looks like, and it's just depressing. Actually, let me now expand on some of those, because a lot of these changes are too egregious to just mention them without a follow-up. By far the worst change is that of Missandei. I am willing to give the benefit of the doubt to the showrunners in casting an adult as opposed to a child due to UK labour laws. Though I do have my suspicions as to why she was actually made an adult. But casting an adult should entail that the already brilliant and politically skilled Missandei, who at 11 advises Dany on taxes and cultural practices, should be basically a genius and the MVP of Team Daenerys, right? Well, of course not. Missandei is made to only be a translator, which means that often she has nothing to do. She rarely offers her insight to Daenerys the way she does in the books. I seem to recall only one instance in season 5. And it's actually very hard to believe that she is Dany's bestie because they barely talk. Recall how many discussions Tyrion and Varys, who are besties in the show, had, as opposed to Dany and Missandei. The scariest change, however, is how the men who prey on Dany or otherwise hurt her are either made into great guys or her victims. This is the case with at least 3 characters: Jorah Mormont, Xarok Xandaxos, and his Dar Zolorak. Jorah in particular is outrageous. We know that George isn't the best at depicting age gaps and the problems of imbalance they cause, yet even he recognizes what Jorah does to Daenerys as grooming and has her call him out. Book Jorah is very clearly a predator who tries to isolate Daenerys from everyone but himself, so that she relies on his guidance alone. He also sexually assaults her in A Storm of Swords by kissing her without her consent, and afterwards, Dany never wants to be alone with him. But in this show, he is shown as genuinely devoted to Daenerys, has pure motivations, his love is real and not suspicious. And Dany is shown colossally disregarding his feelings for her, to the point that people were calling him Sir Friendzone when the show was airing. Xarok Xandaxos obviously preyed on Daenerys, but for other reasons. He wants to marry Dany in Book 2 because there is a custom in Carve that will help him get a dragon. But it's actually heavily implied in the books that he is gay and perhaps even a pedophile. And in the books, Dany has to flee Carve in fear of her life, as Xarok kicks her out of his palace. He reappears in A Dance with Dragons, where he not only declares war on Dany, but also promises her that she will die screaming. All of that was changed to this weird subplot of Xarok wanting to become the king of Carve, which I guess it could work out if more care was put into it. But what is more outrageous is that he steals Dany's dragons with Doria's help, which never happens in the books, and the Mad Queen locks him in the vault. So, a man who compromises Dany's life and well-being on 2 separate occasions is made into her victim instead. And the same with Hisdar. In the book, he is the one who pushes their marriage with Galaza's help. He does not ask for her consent after they are married. The excitement of the day had inflamed her husband's passions. No sooner had her handmaids retired for the night than he tore the rope from her and tumbled her backwards into bed. Then they slid her arms around him and let him have his way. Drunk as he was, she knew he would not be inside her long. Nor was he. Afterward, he nuzzled at her ear and whispered, "God's grant that we have made a son tonight." And as such, I interpret this scene as martial rape. Not to mention that the marriage itself is symbolically linked to slavery. 4 hours later, they emerge again as man and wife. bound together wrist and ankle with chains of yellow gold. And there really is no way he wasn't involved in poisoning of the locusts. He was at the very least aware of it. So he is yet another threat to Dany's life. But in the show, she murders his father, threatens him with dragons, and forces him to marry her. So yet again, we have the pattern of the men who are a threat to Dany's life and well-being becoming her victims instead. The most significant omission in Season 1 was the removal of the house with the red door, which is the manifestation of all of Dany's true desires. A home, a family, a simple and stable life. She remembered Sir Willem dimly, a great grey bear of a man, half-blind, roaring and bellowing orders from his sickbed. The servants had lived in terror of him, but he had always been kind to Dany. He called her little princess and sometimes my lady, and his hands were soft as old leather. He never left the bed though, and the smell of sickness clung to him day and night, a hot, moist, sickly sweet odor. That was when they lived in Braavos, in the big house with the red door. Dany had her own room there, with a lemon tree outside her window. After Sir Willem had died, the servants had stolen what little money they had left, and soon after, they had been put out of the big house. Dany had cried when the red door closed behind them forever. "We will have it all back someday, sweet sister," he would promise her. Sometimes his hands shook when he talked about it. The jewels and the silks, Dragonstone and King's Landing, the Iron Throne and the Seven Kingdoms, all they have taken from us, we will have it back. Viserys lived for that day. All Daenerys wanted back was the big house with the red door, the lemon tree outside her window, the childhood she had never known. The dream of the throne had always belonged to Viserys, and after his death, she sees its reclamation and re-establishment of the dynasty as a matter of duty, and not ambition. If I were not the blood of the dragon, she thought wistfully, this could be my home. She was Khaleesi. She had a strong man and a swift horse, handmaids to serve her, warriors to keep her safe, an honored place in the Doshkalin awaiting her when she grew old. And in her womb grew a son who would one day bestride the world. That should be enough for any woman, but not for the dragon. With Viserys gone, Daenerys was the last, the very last. She was the seed of kings and conquerors, and so too the child inside her. She must not forget. These two short paragraphs embody Daenerys' true desires. She would have been fine with staying among the Dothraki forever, but she feels like she has a higher calling, reclaiming the throne, and not for reasons of personal desire or ambition, but because she believes it is her duty as the last Targaryen. At the end, what she wants and always wanted is the house with the red door, signifying the only truly stable and happy moments of her life. That was never mentioned in the show, even though it was possible to include in the dialogue. As Dany enters a position of leadership by the end of Book 1, what becomes her priority is not power for its own sake, but the responsibility she feels for those who are weak and in need of help, as exemplified by her taking charge of the tiny Kalasar and protecting them to the best of her ability. And later in Astapor, when she learns of how the Unsullied are created and stands in between two choices. One, take the soldiers and don't look back, which would benefit her long-term goal of the Iron Throne, and two, destroy the system that creates them, once and for all. She steadily chooses the second option because of her personal philosophy. Why do the gods make kings and queens if not to protect those who can't protect themselves? Dany could now go to Westeros with her newly acquired army, but she instead decides to conquer Yunkai, a city equally abhorrent in its practices, since its main export are sex slaves, trained since they are children. As she stands by the gates of Meereen, she is urged by her advisors to use her resources and go to Westeros. But if she does that, the freedmen that follow her will starve. For their sake, she conquers the third of the slave cities in Slaver's Bay. But shortly after that, she learns that the leaders of Astapor were overthrown by the Butcher King Cleon, and the entire city fell into chaos, all while Yunkai resumed slaving the moment she departed. She, once more, has the choice to leave it all behind and go to Westeros with her newly acquired resources, but in order to avoid Meereen turning into Astapor or Yunkai, she stays behind. This proves that while Dany does want to go to Westeros in hopes that she may find her home there, she puts her subjects ahead of herself and her own desires, time and time and time again. Her fears of what dragons are capable of cause her to halt conquest in favor of political compromise, all in the shade of the Harpy, whose sons begin a campaign of murder, torture, and intimidation of the freedmen. for the sole crime of having been freed from slavery. She struggles with more and more and more compromise for the entirety of A Dance with Dragons, in hopes of bringing stability to Meereen, going as far as to marry his Darzolorak, a man she hates, in hopes that he will guarantee that no freedman will get murdered ever again. All while she is continuously tempted with Westeros. Xaro arrives and offers 3 ships that will carry her west. Quentyn comes to offer her a marriage pact and Dorne's support. She steadily refuses both and marries Hisdar. So from this we see that Dany's primary motivations are as follows. 1. A family and a place to belong. 2. A sense of duty towards the dynasty. And 3. The sense of duty towards her subjects. Why is the omission of the House with the Red Door so crucial? Because with it, the core of Dany's motivations were removed as well. Show Daenerys never verbalizes longing for simplicity and a place to belong. Show Daenerys never saw reclaiming the throne as a matter of duty, but solely as ambition, one that gets stronger with every season. And while Show Daenerys is definitely compassionate towards the slaves, else she wouldn't have stayed in Meereen, the numerous situations in which she puts their well-being ahead of her own needs and desires were removed or toned down. This is best exemplified by the fact that, for whatever reason, she is the one forcing Hisdar to marry her and not the other way around. Hisdar and Galaza urge her to take him for a husband because that seems to be the only way to reach the peace she so desires. Every character in the history of literature has a goal and has motivations. You would think that if you adapt the story, these motivations should be kept intact. But in the case of Daenerys, 2 out of 3 of those were decisively removed, and 1 was heavily downplayed. And this isn't because they ran out of books to adapt. Not if it's already visible in season 2 out of 8.
I am not your little princess. I am Daenerys Stormborn of the blood of old Valyria, and I will take what is mine. With fire and blood, I will take it.
For Show Daenerys, reclaiming the Iron Throne is a matter of single-minded obsession, fueled by ambition, not duty. This makes for a rather contradictory characterization and unnecessarily drags the storyline in Meereen in particular. There's no compromise, no temptation, no struggle with herself and her true desires, no sense of duty. She is in the fire and blood mindset beginning to end. She wants the throne because she believes it's hers and nothing about that. It also shows her as unreasonably entitled, which was no doubt the intention all along. And without her core motivation of a home and a family, it feels at times like Show Daenerys is devoid of any internal life and internal struggles. The actor who became a household name for portraying Daenerys Targaryen in HBO's epic fantasy series for 8 seasons actually fought back against the producers of the show when they tried to make her character too cold and expressionless. It's like Daenerys' calling card became called expressionlessness. I always wanted to infuse that with some humanity because no one's consistently like that, the actress revealed, adding that she would sometimes fight back a little. She went on to add that she got it that Daenerys' character had to be unforgiving and a powerful force, but there were moments she felt that the character was also a human being, and so would try to incorporate it into the scenes and hope that it made it to the final cut. Who and at what point decided that Daenerys' calling card should be called expressionlessness? Because she is certainly neither cold nor expressionless in the books. Episode Lord Snow is a good moment to bring up another change in Dany's character. The removal of more whimsical aspects of her personality in favor of making her more stoic, a change that will follow for the rest of the show. She rode on, submerging herself deeper in the Dothraki Sea. The green swallowed her up. The air was rich with the scents of earth and grass, mixed with the smell of horseflesh and Dany's sweat and the oil in her hair. Dothraki smells. They seemed to belong here. Dany breathed it all in, laughing. She had a sudden urge to feel the ground beneath her, to curl her toes in the thick black soil. Swinging down from her saddle, she let the silver graze while she pulled off her high boots. In the show, Dany does not verbally express her admiration of the land. She is shown admiring the scenery, but she does not giggle and does not take off her boots just for fun. All things a teenager could definitely do. She instead remains stoic. The author describes her as very funny. If you had to choose a traveling companion among your characters, who would it be? If it were a more romantic getaway, I would take Daenerys Targaryen because, in addition to being very funny, she is a very beautiful woman. and the books corroborate this assertion. The show, as per usual, omitted cute and whimsical Dany moments. The slippers the Butcher King had sent her had grown too uncomfortable. Dany kicked them off and sat with one foot tucked beneath her and the other swinging back and forth. It was not a very regal pose, but she was tired of being regal. The crown had given her a headache, and her buttocks had gone to sleep. "Sir Barstan," she called, "I know what quality a king needs most." "Courage, your grace." "Cheeks like iron," she teased. "All I do is sit." From the earliest seasons, the show was dedicated to not only making Dany cold, stoic, and expressionless, but also entitled. The pattern of Dany being demanding and even somewhat entitled continues in the show, where this is the tone of the voice she uses while talking to the Mayaki.
I spoke for you. I saved you.
Whereas in the books, she uses a different tone of voice. "I spoke for you." She said, "anguished." "I saved you." Book Daenerys is always polite and respectful, whereas already in season 1, she becomes demanding, and her emotional vulnerability is substituted with anger. Another change is Dany's reaction to Drogo falling off his horse. I have the impression that show Daenerys is indeed terrified, but tries to hide it beneath the veneer of anger.
Khaleesi,
Come, he's very strong. No one understands how strong he is.
he will die tonight, Khaleesi.
He can't, I won't let him.
Even a queen doesn't have that power. We must go quickly. I've heard there's a good port in Ashai.
I won't leave him.
He's already gone, Khaleesi.
Even if he dies, why would I run? I am Khaleesi, and my son will be Khal after Drogo.
This isn't Westeros, where men honor blood. Here they only honor strength. They'll be fighting after Drogo dies. Whoever wins that fight will be the new Khal. He won't want any rivals. Your boy will be plucked from your breast and given to the dogs.
I won't leave him.
In the books, her fear is what shines through it all. Iroi stared fearfully at Drogo where he lay. "He dies," she whispered. Dany slapped her. "The Khal cannot die. He is the father of the stallion who mounts the world. His hair has never been cut. He still wears the bells his father gave him." "Khaleesi," Jikwi said. He fell from his horse. Trembling, her eyes full of sudden tears, Dany turned away from them. He fell from his horse. It was so, she had seen it, and the Blood Riders, and no doubt her handmaids, and the men of her caste as well. A foul, sweet smell rose from the wound, so thick it almost choked her. The leaves were crusted with blood and pus, Drogo's breast black and glistening with corruption. "No," Dany whispered as tears ran down her cheeks. "No, please, God hear me, no." Khal Drogo thrashed, fighting some unseen enemy. Black blood ran slow and thick from his open wound. "Your Khal is good as dead, princess." "No, he can't die, he mustn't. It was only a cut." Dany took his large callous hand in her own small ones, and held it tight between them. "I will not let him die. The boy will be taken from your breast the moment he is born. They will give him to the dogs." Dany hugged herself. "But why?" she cried plaintively. "Why would they kill a little baby?" Dany did not want to go back to Varys Dothraki and live the rest of her life among those terrible old women, yet she knew that the night spoke the truth. Drogo had been more than her sun and stars. He had been the shield that kept her safe. "I will not leave him," she said stubbornly, miserably. She took his hand again. "I will not." Show Daenerys is shown to be scared, but also angry, to hide it. Book Daenerys cannot help but show her fear. This is also visible in how the exchange between her and Koto plays out.
Javrati lech, mezin Khaleesi shafki.
Kash koi koi, tira disse!
Betri voi, me vossi.
Anha vos zavek. Anha koi zarvossi.
Ser Jorah stepped between them, loosening his longsword in its scabbard. "Rein in your tongue, Blood Rider. The princess is still your Khaleesi. Only while the blood of my blood still lives," Koto told the knight. "When he dies, she is nothing." Dany felt a tightness inside her. "Before I was Khaleesi, I was the blood of the dragon. Ser Jorah, summon my Cass." The show has Dany deliver this line angrily. In the books, we have no indication of this whatsoever. The show focused on Dany's anger. The books highlighted her fear. In her interactions with Miri, Dany is shown as demanding rather than pleading.
You've saved me once more.
And now you must save him.
He's beyond the healer's skills. All I can do is ease his path.
Save him and I will free you, I swear it. You must know a way. Some magic.
Dany turned back to Miri Mazdur. The woman's eyes were wary. "So you have saved me once more. And now you must save him," Dany said. "Please." "You do not ask a slave," Miri replied sharply. "You tell her." After this exchange, Dany's despair is also omitted. Her words were a knife through Dany's breast. What had she ever done to make the gods so cruel? She had finally found a safe place, had finally tasted love and hope. She was finally going home. And now to lose it all. No, she pleaded. Save him and I will free you. I swear it. You must know a way. Some magic, some... Dany being demanding as opposed to pleading, and Dany hiding her fear behind anger, coupled with the removal of her positive emotions and the respect she shows to everyone around her in favor of making her demanding, is a choice that will continue as we go forward with the show. The pattern of entitlement and arrogance continues in Season 2.
He shouldn't make me wait.
The Spice King is the second wealthiest man in Karcz. He makes everyone wait. Of course, you could have avoided this embarrassment if you married the wealthiest man in Karcz.
I already have a husband.
Khal Drogo is gone, Khaleesi. You are far too young to be a widow forever, and far too beautiful.
You are far too smart to think that I will succumb to flattery.
I admire your passion, but in business I trust in logic, not passion. I'm sorry, little princess.
I am not your little princess. I am Daenerys Stormborn of the blood of old Valyria, and I will take what is mine. With fire and blood, I will take it.
Yes, my lady, but not with my ships.
Another outrageous scene where Dany is once more shown as petulant, demanding and argumentative, starkly different from her book counterpart, who always has respect for everyone around her. In the books, the meeting between Dany and the merchants is actually conducted off-screen. I see a deep sadness written upon your face, my light of love. He offered her a goblet. Could it be the sadness of a lost dream? A dream delayed, no more. Dany's tight silver collar was chafing against her throat. She unfastened it and flung it aside. The collar was set with an enchanted amethyst that Xaro swore would ward her against all poisons. The pureborn were notorious for offering poisoned wine to those they thought dangerous, but they had not given Dany as much as a cup of water. They never saw me for a queen, she thought bitterly. I was only an afternoon's amusement, a horse girl with a curious pet. Tell me the words of the pureborn, prompted Xaro Daxos. Tell me what they said to sadden the queen of my heart. They said no. The wine tasted of pomegranates and hot summer days. They said it with great courtesy, to be sure, but under all the lovely words it was still no. Did you flatter them? Shamelessly. Did you weep? The blood of the dragon does not weep, she said testily. Xaro cited. You ought to have wept. The Guardian wept often and easily. It was considered a mark of the civilized man. The men we bought, what did they say? Mathos said nothing. Wendello praised the way I spoke. The exquisite refused me with the rest, but he wept afterward. Alas, that Carthian should be so faithless. Xaro was not himself of the pureborn, but he had told her whom to bride and how much to offer. Weep, weep, for the treachery of man. So we can assume that Daenerys was not demanding and petulant in her meeting with the guilds of merchants. Daenerys is once more shown as petulant in her conversations with Xaro, even though in the books she is always polite.
I've demanded a meeting of the 13. One of them did this or knows who did.
You are one of the 13.
If I wanted your dragons, I would have taken them. They mean nothing to me on their own.
Nothing. They're more valuable than anything in the world.
Shall we look inside my vault and see what selling your dragons would buy me I cannot buy already? We will get them back.
There is no we. So why would you help me get them back?
I took you under my protection in front of the rulers of my city. A man is what others say he is and no more. If they say that Xaro Zohan Doxos is a liar, my word is worth nothing. I cannot let this thing happen to you under my roof.
But it did happen under your roof.
Khaleesi, many times in my life, I
don't care where you've been.
Show Daenerys is also bragging about her achievements, whereas her book self is consistently humble.
For my wedding, he gave me 3 petrified dragon eggs. He believed, the world believed, that the ages had turned them to stone. How many centuries had it been since dragons roamed the skies? But I dreamt that if I carried those eggs into a great fire, they would hatch. When I stepped into the fire, my own people thought I was mad. But when the fire burned out, I was unhurt. The mother of dragons. Do you understand? I'm no ordinary woman. My dreams come true.
Half a year gone, that man could scarcely wake fire from dragonglass. He had some small skill with powders and wildfire, sufficient to entrance a crowd, while his cat purses did their work. He could walk across hot coals and make burning roses bloom in the air, but he could no more aspire to climb the fiery ladder than the common fisherman could hope to catch a kraken in his nets. Then he looked uneasily at where the ladder had stood. Even the smoke was gone now, and the crowd was breaking up, each man going about his business. In a moment more than a few would find their purses flat and empty. And now his powers grow, Khaleesi. And you are the cause of it. Me? She laughed. How could that be? That seems to be because the showrunners prioritize spectacle ahead of characterization. Since her storyline is detached from Westeros, the producers mostly used her to give us epic scenes. Who doesn't like the Dracarys scene in Astapor? I certainly do, but even in the early seasons, Dany is portrayed like an MCU character and not a teenager wrestling with her own demons and the burdens of duty. The adaptation also downplays Dany's intelligence, most notably in season 3. In the books, it is Dany herself who comes up with the idea on how to conquer Yunkai, a feat all that more admirable considering that she's never even had formal education, much less military training, which most girls in that world won't get anyway. In the show, however, the plan on how to deal with Yunkai is changed and given to Daenerys Naharis. The adaptation makes Dany noticeably more distant from others. Book Daenerys is very affectionate. She has a habit of kissing people on the cheek, she calls her handmaid Sweetling, she consoles Missandei. She's playful and funny, jogs around with Barristan, and throws cherries at Xaro. It is also weird to call Daenerys unforgiving. Daenerys is too forgiving for her own good. She forgave Barristan lying to her. She was willing to forgive Jorah. She is too soft on the Sons of the Harpy. Show Daenerys is also noticeably less self-reflective. In First of His Name, Dany learns of Joffrey's death, Tommen's coronation, and Second Sons taking the Myrrhynese navy at Darius' instigation, which her advisors argue are signs to attack Westeros. News arrives that the Masters retook Yunkai and re-enslaved everyone who stayed behind, as well as the fall of Astapor. Dany seems rather distraught by the news, but in front of Jorah, she gives a facade of stoicism and strength. Jorah urges her to leave Slaver's Bay behind, but Dany points out that if she cannot control Slaver's Bay, she cannot hope to rule Westeros, and thus decides to stay in Meereen. In the books, Dany's decision to stay in Meereen has additional reasons. That morning she summoned her captains and commanders to the garden, rather than descending to the audience chamber. Aegon the Conqueror brought fire and blood to Westeros, but afterward he gave them peace, prosperity and justice. But all I have brought to Slaver's Bay is death and ruin. I have been more Khaldan Queen, smashing and plundering, than moving on. There is nothing to stay for, said Brownbone Plum. Your Grace, the slavers brought their doom on themselves, said Daenerys Naharis. You have brought freedom as well, Missandei pointed out. Freedom to starve? Asked Dany sharply. Freedom to die? Am I a dragon or a harpy? Am I mad? Do I have detained? A dragon, Sir Barristan said with certainty. Meereen is not Westeros, Your Grace. But how can I rule 7 kingdoms if I cannot rule a single city? He had no answer to that. Dany turned away from them to gaze out over the city once again. My children need time to heal and learn. My dragons need time to grow and test their wings. And I need the same. I will not let this city go the way of Astapor. I will not let the Harpy of Yunkai chain up those I freed all over again. She turned back to look at their faces. I will not march. What will you do then, Khaleesi? Asked Rhaegar. Stay, she said. Rule. And be a queen. In the book dialogue, Dany is visibly more self-critical than show Daenerys. Note her comparing herself to a Khal in a derogatory way and verbally acknowledging the mistakes she's made during her campaign, as well as her internal worries about the taint of madness. I also suspect that the assertion that Daenerys only stayed in Meereen to try out being a queen, as opposed to genuinely wishing to make it a free city, might result from the lack of these crucial insights. In short, book Daenerys is empathetic, playful, a bit whimsical, dreamy, forgiving, and eager to compromise. Show Daenerys is stern, stoic, unforgiving, forceful, entitled, and quick to anger. If you think about it, they seem to be opposites, and I feel the need to reiterate. By itself, there's nothing wrong with a female character acting the way Dany does, nor is there anything wrong with her having a sense of entitlement. These are traits that are admired and respected in male characters, and disparaged in female ones. But once again, if you adapt one of the main characters on screen, you should maybe stay faithful to the source material, try to grasp the nuances of a young girl navigating a patriarchal world without stripping her of all emotions and all humanity to the point that the actress has reservations about that. And since that behavior will be projected on book Dany, maliciously or not, you will find people who also call book Dany entitled, arrogant, demanding, and whatnot. It is understandable that the show decided to age up all of its child characters. No child should be forced to act in scenes of horrific abuse. Additionally, the UK in particular has strict laws pertaining to child labor. Nonetheless, that impacted both the characterization and the perception in the fandom. Not just Daenerys, of course. Robb is another example that comes to mind, but we focus on Dany here. Book Daenerys starts this story at just 13 years old. She is in the 8th grade and should probably be doing TikTok dances or joking about Skibidi Toilet. I don't know what 13-year-olds do these days. But when you read the book and then watch the adaptation, the images of the characters you've had will probably be replaced by the images of the actors. And if you first watch the show and then read the books, then you will probably imagine Emilia as Daenerys all along, as she was your introduction to Dany. You would imagine not a 13, 14, 15-year-old, but 20-something Emilia Clarke. And while it's true that Emilia has a severe case of baby face and is on a smaller side in terms of physique, it was clear from the get-go that she is an adult woman. And even though Daenerys in the show is supposed to be 16, Emilia most certainly didn't look 16. Nor did she act like a 16 years old. And while 16 is still very young, it's not as jarringly young as 13. It is true that the narrative does sexualize book Daenerys. She is probably the only such young character to have detailed sex scenes and detailed descriptions of her body, including her breasts and sexual organs. That is entirely on George, who is a weirdo in that aspect. But what is also true is that book Daenerys very much acts like a teenager. A precocious teenager, to be sure, a teenager that was forced to grow up fast and who carries an enormous responsibility on her shoulders. But still a teenager. Daenerys looks triumphant at her newly conquered city, whereas in the books she has the following thoughts. When she was dressed, Missandei brought her a polished silver glass so she could see how she looked. Daenerys stared at herself in silence. Is this the face of a conqueror? So far as she could tell, she still looked like a little girl. I understand that show Daenerys is older and is played by an older actress, but by my estimation she is about 19 in the show now. Still very young, and still can have the impression that, in the grand scheme of things, she is just a girl. This continues the pattern of undermining her book personality, which is very much that of a young girl at the brink of adulthood. Still a bit whimsical, still a bit unsure of her role in the world, still vulnerable. A bright, shining child queen, as Barristan calls her in A Dance with Dragons. And we know that Emilia fought to have this aspect of Daenerys preserved in the adaptation, so it's disheartening to know that it was a possibility that ultimately got disregarded. At her core, Daenerys remains a fictional character, and these scenes written about her can't personally hurt her. Doesn't change the fact that this should be resisted and criticized on other grounds. But the show character of Daenerys is not entirely fictional in the same sense. She is portrayed by a real person. Sexualizing a character who is supposed to be 16 is still weird. And what is even more wrong is the consistent objectification of Emilia's body. Intimacy coordinators are a very recent thing on sets. HBO paved the way, so to speak, by starting to employ them in 2019, after Game of Thrones already concluded. And Emilia has some horror stories about how she's been treated on set. Emilia Clarke has discussed Game of Thrones' demand for nudity before, but in a recent podcast appearance, she got particularly candid, explaining the pressure she felt not only during the show's early days, but also on projects she's taken on since then. I've had fights on set before, where I'm like, no, this shit stays up. And they're like, you don't want to disappoint your Game of Thrones fans, Clarke said. And I'm like, fuck you. On the podcast, Shepard brought up a season 1 scene in which Momoa's character, Khal Drogo, virtually rapes Daenerys on their wedding night. He was crying more than I was, Clarke replied. It's only now that I realize how fortunate I was with that, because that could have gone many different ways, she said. Because Jason had experience. He was an experienced actor who had done a bunch of stuff before coming onto this. He was like, sweetie, this is how it's meant to be. This is how it's not meant to be, and I'm going to make sure that that's the fucking case. He was always like, can we get her a fucking rope? She's shivering. He was so kind and considerate and cared about me as a human being. Note that this didn't happen only to Daenerys. Missandei was also aged up from 11, and Natalie Emmanuel also had nude scenes in the show. In the books, the age of majority is 16, and Daenerys is only just approaching that age. Had she been in Westeros, she would have still been ruled by regents. She is the equivalent of a 17-year-old in our world. But because most people remember Emilia's portrayal, she will not be perceived as a teenager, but as an adult, and that will result in placing higher standards on her as opposed to characters played by actual children. Often, the mere mention of her young age will be met with resistance by the same people who invoke age as a defense for other characters. Especially because the aging up caused the showrunners to throw away a lot of her whimsy and vulnerability, even though a lot of those could be kept, especially in earlier seasons when she is still a teen. And to be sure, a person in their early 20s can still act young and vulnerable. If you want to challenge this perception in yourself, the best way to do it is to choose an age-accurate fanart and base your imagination off of it.
That is why I've ordered Dario to execute every master in Jung. The masters tear babies from their mothers' arms. They mutilate little boys by the thousands. They train little girls in the art of pleasuring old men. They treat men like beasts, as you said yourself.
Herding the masters into pens and slaughtering them by the thousands is also treating men like beasts. The slaves you freed, brutality is all they've ever known. If you want them to know something else, you'll have to show it to them.
And repay the slavers with what? Kindness? A fine? A stern warning?
It's tempting to see your enemies as evil, all of them. But there's good and evil on both sides in every war ever fought.
Let the priests argue over good and evil. Slavery is real. I can end it, I will end it, and I will end those behind it.
I sold men into slavery, Khaleesi.
And now, you are helping me show them to freedom.
I wouldn't be here to help you if Ned Stark had done to me what you want to do to the masters of Yunkai.
Not about Sam's D&D stance on slavery, coupled with their sincere wish to create a show where the Confederacy won speaks for itself. The assumption here seems to be that the system of slavery by itself isn't wrong, but slave masters are wrong. This is reiterated by two other situations, when an old scholar comes to Dany and begs to be able to sell himself back to slavery, and the situation with his There's That. The man is a freedman who was a tutor to the affluent master of Meereen. When Daenerys took the city, the children begged the old man to not leave the house, and now he lives on the street. He informs Daenerys that the places of shelter she established are chaotic and lawless, something Daenerys is apparently ignorant of. Dany promises to send the Unsullied to re-establish order, but the man says that this is moot, as he does not have what he had previously. A position of respect, love, and stability. The man then asks to be allowed to sell himself back to slavery, as he is too old to find a place for himself in the new order, and that many others want to follow suit. Daenerys concedes, saying that freedom means making choices, and allows the man to be re-employed on a yearly contract with the former master. Barristan warns that the masters will take advantage of the situation, and that the re-employed freedmen will now be slaves in all but name. As you might remember in previous episodes, Jorah insisted that there are good masters who deserve to be spared and respected. The master of the scholar is precisely that good master. This creates a situation in which slavery itself isn't the problem, it's the mini slave masters, and that it would simply be preferable to convince the slavers to be nice to their chattel than to outlaw the institution entirely. This exchange ignores one crucial thing. Slaves that are pampered and loved by their masters, as well as slaves that are skilled craftsmen, are in a minority. Not only that, their position is not and has never been stable. Relying solely on the benevolence of the slave master means walking on a very shaky ground. Who is to say that the master won't change his mind any day for any reason? This freedman is an old man. What happens to him when he's hit with dementia or cannot fulfill his duties anymore for other reasons? Moreover, if the master of the scholar liked the man so much, what stopped him from re-employing him as a free man and paying him for his services? The inclusion of the slave scholar is mostly there to show Dany as short-sighted in her campaign to end the system in which human beings are owned like objects. Once again, it presents the situation in which slavery is a matter of a few bad actors treating their chattel badly, and not a system that has exploitation and imbalance written at its very core, where a good 99% of slave masters are abhorrent individuals who abuse and mistreat their slaves. This view becomes apparent in Season 8, where Dany's anti-slavery campaign is used as madness foreshadowing that explicitly invokes Niemuller's First They Came. First she came for the slavers, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a slaver. And it could not be more obvious given Jorah's dialogue, especially coupled with his drastically changed characterization. Some of them are innocent and good and should be spared. But fact for the matter is, even if there are amazing slavers who treat their slaves like their family, they still exploit their unpaid labor and still benefit from a system built on thousands of years of suffering and exploitation, and do nothing to change or alleviate that. Therefore, they are complicit. If they do not actively resist that system, they are complicit and their goodness is merely a facade. Like, do you want a medal for treating your slaves well? That is not even a bare minimum. The personal character of these slave masters does not matter if they do not actively resist the system. And we know that it is possible to do so. That is the whole point of the character of Skahaz Mokandak, a Meereenese noble who immediately backed Dany's new order, and coincidentally was cut from the show. And while we might argue about what are Skahaz's true motivations, whether he acts the way he does solely due to personal ambition, it does not matter in the grand scheme of things because ultimately it's his actions that impact things, and his actions, regardless of motivations, make him into an anti-slavery agent. A good slave master who does nothing to stop the system is morally worse than Skahaz going against the slavers because he is a social climber. The same exact thing could be said about the subplot of His Does That, which is the invention of the show.
Queen Daenerys, tales of your beauty were not exaggerated.
I thank you.
Mine is one of the oldest and proudest families in Meereen.
Then it is my honor to receive you.
My father, one of Meereen's most respected and beloved citizens, oversaw the restoration and maintenance of its greatest landmarks, this pyramid included.
For that, he has my gratitude. I should be honored to meet him.
You have, Your Grace. You crucified him. I pray you will never live to see a member of your family treated so cruelly.
Your father crucified innocent children.
My father spoke out against crucifying those children. He decried it as a criminal act, but was overruled. Is it justice to answer one crime with another?
I am sorry you no longer have a father, but my treatment of the masters was no crime. You'd be wise to remember that.
What's done is done. You are the queen, and I am a servant of Meereen, a servant who does not wish to see its traditions eradicated.
And what traditions do you speak of?
The tradition of funeral rite, proper burial in the Temple of the Graces. My father and 162 noble Meereenese are still nailed to those posts, carrion for vultures, rotting in the sun. Your Grace, I ask that you order these men taken down so that they might receive proper burials.
And what of the slave children these noble Meereenese crucified? They were rotting in the sun as well. Would you have begged me for their right to a proper burial?
Your Grace, I cannot defend the actions of the masters. I can only speak to you as a son who loved his father. Let me take his body down. Let me have him brought to the temple and buried with dignity so that he might find peace in the next world.
Bury your father.
Thank you, my queen.
Hizdar's father is the same archetype Jorah alleges to, the good slave masters who deserves to be spared. But Hizdar's dad did the bare minimum. He opposed the crucifixion of innocent slave children. He was no abolitionist. He still owned slaves. Even in the show canon, the Lorax are implied to be wealthy and influential. How did they reach that status, if not at the backs of slaves? Who do you think built this pyramid?
Ale to nie są niewolnicy, to wysokiej klasy fachowcy zatrudnieni na umowę o dzieło i nawet dostają jeść.
Don't get me started on, but this is normal to them, it's their culture. I really don't care. They have all the tools to recognize the mistreatment of slaves all around them as wrong. If they wouldn't abuse and sell their children or loved ones, why do they think it's fine to do it to other human beings? Because they don't recognize them as human beings worthy of respect and protection, but as objects, and that stems from the fact that they benefit from this system every second of every day. They have all the tools to join in with the revolution like Skahas did. They don't do it, not because they don't know any better, but because it benefits them. Their wealth and influence is built on the backs of slaves. In history, there have always been figures from the privileged castes who recognized the system that benefits them as wrong and became class traitors. John Brown was a white man absolutely fanatical in his abolitionism. Joe Slovo was a white Afrikaner who joined in the militant anti-apartheid struggle. It is possible, there are precedents, that someone doesn't actively resist the system itself in whatever capacity they have, speaks of their character. Again, Hitler's father didn't even do the bare minimum. It seems to me like the showrunners assume that in Martin's world, nobody is 100% good or 100% bad and run with it, applying some bogus nuance to the issue of owning human beings like chattel. I chose this as the most serious issue in the show's adaptation of Daenerys for obvious reasons. The signs of the showrunners' stance on slavery and its culmination in season 8 that compares slave masters to Holocaust victims was telegraphed to us from a mile ahead. The fundamental thesis of this series of videos is the impact Dany's show characterization had on the perception of her book character. That largely happens subconsciously, as we often do not control how the two mediums mix in our minds into a single entity, especially given how much reverence the show Game of Thrones gets to this day, how many people were introduced to the books via the show, and how many bad actors knowingly push this mixing up. But once you firmly separate the two mediums, you will realize that many times that book Dany is accused of something, people actually talk of her show counterpart, consciously or not. I call the manifestations of this mixing up show residues. Let us now count all the things that, in my opinion, contributed to that bizarre state of things. A careful reading of A Game of Thrones will have you realize that Daenerys very much knew what she was doing with the pyre. Her dragon dreams and Miri's teachings, only death pays for life, helped her piece up these clues and resulted in the birth of dragons. But since her dragon dreams were omitted from the show, and the only allusion we have to her having them is a short throwaway line in season 2, you might indeed get an impression that Dany walked into the pyre on a whim and lucked out. Some people go as far as to assert that Dany isn't really a dragon dreamer, cause how could she be if you don't remember her actually having dreams in the books? The thing that I have encountered very often in the fandom is how people can simultaneously use characters' ages as a defense, while also denying the same defense to Daenerys, who isn't that much older than them. That is most likely the result of the show aging Daenerys up and making her act like an adult from the get-go. Characters such as Arya, Sansa or Bran were very much shown to be children and were played by actors closer in age to their book counterparts. But when people think of book Daenerys, they think of Emilia Clarke, who was visibly an adult all along, and most notably was acting like an adult all along. As such, whenever the extremely harsh criticism Dany faces is challenged, and these critics are reminded that we talk of someone who, in our world, is an equivalent to a 17-year-old, they reject those altogether, and then turn around and defend other characters on the basis of their young age. It sometimes reaches a point that the same people who are disgusted by the sexual abuse faced by other child characters also argued that Dany had the capability to actually love Drogo and consent to him. Because in the show, the dynamic isn't nearly as unbalanced as in the books, due to her being perceived as an adult. It becomes a dark romance in their eyes, as opposed to child sexual abuse. That is because when they read of the rape and abuse Drogo unleashed on Dany in the book, they won't see a 13-year-old, but an adult Emilia Clarke. Surely, George sexualizing book Daenerys is to blame as well, but the key factor here must be the show. The accusation against Book Dany that you will often hear is that she is obsessed with the throne and will do anything to get it. For instance, when people claim that in The Winds of Winter, she will throw a temper tantrum where there's another, more beloved Targaryen on the throne. Irrespective of Book Dany's core wish is the desire for a family. That is, of course, another show residue, since in the show, Dany never truly desired a family and was fixated on the throne as a birthright from the earliest days of the show, even though in the books, she sees it as a matter of duty to her house and to her people. Let me reiterate that by itself, there is nothing wrong with show Dany being ambitious and wanting the throne on the basis of it being her birthright. The problem we encounter here is that 1. This changed Daenerys was projected on Book Daenerys, for whom this very much isn't a matter of birthright and ambition, and 2. The fact that misogynistic showrunners had always pathologized that in Dany due to their ideas about women in power. Look no further than at the fact that the show had Dany and Cersei both be unstable, tyrannical queens. Very early on, in Dany's first chapter actually, she is shown mistrusting Illyrio, saying that the common people can't wait for the return of the Targaryens. Jorah confirms these suspicions, asserting that the commoners pray for mundane things and not for who sits on the throne. Thus, Daenerys is well aware that the support of the houses of Westeros and the common people is not guaranteed. In the show, Jorah also tells Dany that the commoners don't give a fuck, but she herself is contradictory in how she responds to these claims. So much so that she contradicts herself within the same season. In season 2, Dany says that Viserys was a fool to believe that everyone will raise up for him the moment he lands, but then in the House of the Undying, she asserts that the people are waiting for her. She will continue to make such assertions in season 5 in her conversation with Tyrion, who, of course, talks her down out of this delusion. That results in people falsely believing that Book Dany also expects to be welcomed, and will turn towards nuking everything on her path when people don't love her enough. In the earlier segments of the video, I compared how Daenerys reacts to similar things in the books versus in the show, across numerous books and seasons. How her politeness was substituted with entitlement, how her respect towards everyone was substituted with arrogance, how her modesty was substituted with bragging about her achievements. And if you run with the perception the show left you with, you will claim that Dany must be the same in the books, even though she isn't. This residue is by far the most apparent and easily recognizable of them all, because really, all you have to do to realize it is carefully reading the text while blocking the show out of your mind. Recently though, I saw more resistance to this residue, though it may be confirmation bias. Still, it's something. I despise the term girlboss with a passion, since what was once describing a very narrow reality of singular women in positions of authority using feminism to enact violence on those more oppressed than them, started getting applied to essentially any woman that has professional goals, any woman that shows any gender non-conforming behavior, any woman possessing ambition, and so on. Thus reifying reactionary ideas of women's place being in the kitchen, but wokely. I even plan to make a separate video on that issue sometime in the future, but for now, I will narrow my focus on Dany's characterization in the show that caused her to be accused of being a girl boss. Book Daenerys is a very nuanced character in terms of the place she occupies in the narrative due to her gender. She is, per the author's words, a gender subversion, meaning that she occupies a role in the narrative that, in fantasy, would normally be reserved for a male character. A dragon rider, a she-king, a she-khal, a military commander, and so on. But at her core, Dany is still a teen girl, one that is rather gender-conforming, all things considered. She likes looking pretty, she wears dresses, grows out her hair, and isn't really a warrior in the way Arya or Brienne are. That nuance was squandered in the show as early as in season 2. You might recall that in season 2, Dany had to threaten the 13 to be let into Karcz as opposed to being invited there. And later, she had this annoying back and forth with the Spice King. I have long wondered why these changes were included and eventually came to the conclusion that It was there to show Dany's need to assert herself in the world dominated by men, especially in the second conversation, as the Spice King is very condescending to her. But, as you are probably aware, Book Dany also navigates in a deeply patriarchal world and never needed to make overt threats of violence to get her way. And do I even have to mention the optics of claiming that a woman aggressively asserting herself against men's condescension is madness foreshadowing? Many assert that the only reason why Dany stayed in Meereen is because she wanted to try out being a queen before she goes to Westeros, even though her explicit motivation in the books is her wish to avoid Meereen turning into Astapor and Yunkai. While the fall of Astapor is mentioned in the show, and the Yunkai did re-enslave everyone the moment Dany left, these issues are not given any narrative weight beyond Season 4. In Season 5, Hizdahr easily negotiated peace in Yunkai for basically nothing in return, and Astapor is forgotten. The failures in Yunkai and Astapor are what chains Dany to Meereen, first and foremost. Without those, her line of "how can I rule Westeros if I can't rule a single city? I will do what queens do, I will rule," without the additional self-reflection, really does give an impression that this is a paid internship sort of situation for her, which isn't the case in the books. It's very difficult to argue in favor of Dany being the singular evil of the books when she spends the bulk of her story ending the abhorrent system of slavery. Some people try, either by openly crying about the ruined economy, or more sneakily, by making it seem like the situation in the Bay isn't nearly as straightforward as it seems. You will get the usual appeals to the unreliable narrator and whatnot, but the claim that is logical to make in this context is precisely to spin the campaign in the Bay as something that is personally beneficial to Daenerys, and it being her only reason for embarking on it. Much like the "some slave masters are nice to their chattel, therefore they're innocent" argument, it ignores how sometimes personal stances do not translate to meaningful action, and vice versa. How some people acting in their self-interest might translate to some meaningful action. Because even if Dany only did it for her own benefit, it would still be a net positive. What probably contributes most to this impression is her acquisition of Unsullied. Without Dany's confiding in Jorah about what she believes being the queen is about, protecting those who can't protect themselves, it really seems like she tricked Krazness just to gain an army for free and nothing else. That she is later seen offering them to leave her service if they so wish, notwithstanding. But that ignores the fact that Dany's anti-slavery campaign halts her long-term goal, both in the show and in the books. If freeing slaves was only a matter of personal gain for her, she wouldn't have bothered to go to Yunkai in the first place, and would have marched west immediately. So, this is an argument that is dumb, even in the context of the show alone. Once it was en vogue to claim that in her retaliation on the crucifixion of the slave children, Dany crucified innocent slave masters, but some people more aware of the optics realized how bad this sounds. Instead, they twisted the argument to insist that by not establishing the ICC overnight and not presiding over this particular case for months if not years to get exactly those responsible, Dany didn't get the actual culprits. This argument was, no doubt, fueled by the situation with Hizdahr's dad, one that only happens in the show. The argument was changed into she killed random people and didn't bother to investigate who was responsible, meaning some people no doubt got away with it, and perhaps the slave masters were shrewd enough to sacrifice the less powerful nobles to protect themselves as a group. That, of course, ignores the fact that in A Dance with Dragons we learn that many significant and noble families are now led by women, since the men were crucified. I say that this is a residue from the show precisely because the next logical step from she was careless and killed someone who was innocent of this particular crime is precisely that means some people could have gotten away with it. One constant in most of the seasons is how Daenerys is controlled and tempered by the men around her. All three of her primary advisors, Jorah, Barristan and later Tyrion, have too often talked her out of impulsive decisions and steer her in the right course of action. Think no further than Jorah talking her out of killing the slave masters of Yunkai, Barristan warning her that Killing slavers means that she may become like the Mad King, and Tyrion becoming her court mansplainer the moment he appears in Meereen. While normally it would be indicative of something good that Dany is willing to listen to the people around her, it was most certainly not the intention of the showrunners. They basically wanted to show her as a rabid dog that has to be tempered by reasonable men. Tyrion's appearance in season 5 make it all that more apparent, and the showrunners were so incompetent that they both made Dany follow his advice and cause her failures for it. So they explicitly condemned her for doing the thing they expected her to do. But whatever the case, even if the theories of Tyrion being the devil on Dany's shoulder in the Winds of Winter were not outright caused by the show, it probably exacerbated them. Since Dany needs to be controlled and tempered by her male council members, thus making her dependent on their insights, then it would be easy for Tyrion to exploit it for his own ends. All in contradiction to the fact that Book Dany's philosophy is that the queen must listen to all, and the queen who trusts everyone is as foolish as the one who trusts no one. The show Game of Thrones was never free from controversy, and one of the earliest ones was the Misa scene in the season 3 finale, which allegedly portrayed Daenerys as a white savior. George himself addressed this issue. Most of these people have obviously not read the books. If they had, they would know there is no racial component to slavery as practiced on Essos. It is based on slavery as it existed in the ancient world. The Romans and Greeks were just as willing to enslave other Greeks and Romans as they were Celts, Goths, Germans, and Africans. It's on the page. However, when you are filming scenes in Morocco and you put out a call for extras, it's Moroccans who show up. Most of them are darker skinned than our European actors, though there is actually a lot of different races and ethnic groups represented in the country, including Arabs, Berbers, Africans, French, etc. It is not so different from shooting a scene in Belfast and putting out a call for extras, whereupon a lot of Irish show up. We fly our actors from country to country and continent to continent at considerable expense, but that's not a practical consideration when dealing with extras. So in any big crowd scene, the prevailing skin color is always going to echo that of whatever the location is that you're shooting in. But just for the record, yes, Dany is white, just as she has been from the beginning, and she may or may not be a savior. The last scene in Misa is not the end of her journey by any means, but she frees slaves of all colors, races, creeds, and nationalities. This scene could have been made less offensive even with the Moroccan extras, if only the sea of brown people lifting a white woman up was written differently. If she just walked among them, it would perhaps not be as big of a problem, but someone in the production decided it would be a good idea to have her be raised like this. It was certainly not there to sneakily show that Daenerys is an evil white savior like it is claimed by some less sharp tools in the shed. The people who wrote this episode, Benioff and Weiss, were two white men who wanted to make a show where the Confederacy won. Surely, such characters would not be shrewd enough to include such a nuanced criticism in their show. 11 years later, this argument persists, even, and maybe especially, in the context of the books, where it's made abundantly clear that Essosi slavery is class-based. We see Lyseni and Carthin unsullied after all, and we know that the Giscari also enslave members of their own ethnicity. Any and all the people who make arguments about how Book Daenerys is a white savior either didn't read the books or allowed the show to completely overtake their perception of the story. Both puzzling stances to take, to say the least. At some point, the go-to talking point about Dany was to assert that her campaign in Slaver's Bay is an allegory or a metaphor for the Iraq War, courtesy of one big-name fan who himself was a colonial US soldier. This argument makes not an ounce of sense, given that A Storm of Swords came out before the War on Terror began. But nonetheless, people ran with it and ran with it to this very day. Technicalities sometimes change, but the core is Dany rules Slaver's Bay in an imperialist or colonizing way. I didn't realize that this may be a residue from the show until it was pointed out to me by one of my viewers, Synthoras. Now I fully understand where that silly claim that Dany is a symbol for the US in the Iraq War comes from, where she means well but is just too culturally insensitive. That, coincidentally, neither applies to her nor to the actual aims of the US in the Iraq War. Let me explain, since it may not be immediately apparent. In the books, Dany does close the fighting pits, but when that happens, their value plummets. He buys them all, and then begs Dany to reopen them. Thus, it is a skillful business move on his part. In the show, however, Hizdahr does not do that, and argues in favor of reopening the fighting pits on the basis of cultural preservation. And Dany's stern refusal really seems like cultural insensitivity. And from that, the path of she's an imperialist and colonizer who imposes her Western values on the Eastern people is straight. Irrespective of the fact that, she is indigenous to Essos herself and spent all of her life there. The line Daenerys says in Season 2, "I will take what is mine, with fire and blood," is never once uttered in the books. Yet there is no shortage of people claiming that Book Dany also goes around and screams that. For example, this person in my TikTok comments. User KMT2K says, "I will take what is mine, with fire and blood," is said multiple times in first book. I don't have a physical copy. The problem in the slightest. I have a PDF copy which will make it even easier for me to find instances of Daenerys saying "with fire and blood" multiple times. With fire and blood. Oopsie! The only person to say something remotely similar is actually Hizdahr Zolorak, when he claims that before Dany's arrival, Meereen was stagnating, but she awoke them with fire and blood. I don't think I have to offer a comment here. It's an obvious show residue, since the only time these words are actually uttered are in the show. The mindset of "I will take what is mine, with fire and blood" is exclusive to show Daenerys. These are probably not all of the residues I could have found, since, I don't know all of my scripts by heart. If there is something that you believe I overlooked, please let me know in the comments. At the beginning of the first part of the series, I said that I have immense love for both versions of the characters, and that I could not see anyone bring Daenerys to life better than Emilia Clarke. I feared that this opinion would change once I concluded this series, but luckily it didn't. I have treated the two of them as separate entities before, but now that I systematized their differences, they have never been more separate in my mind. But luckily, in spite of what it may seem given my often sore commentary of the show character, I still love show Daenerys. In fact, the series gave me more appreciation to Emilia than ever, especially in the face of the challenges she faced. The showrunners objectifying her body, an insight for the character being disregarded, and the literal threat to her life in the form of 2 brain injuries. My grievance had never been with Dany's personality in the show at face value. It was always about how the showrunners disregarded her book personality from very early on, and how the audiences happily and readily projected this portrayal on book Daenerys, without any reflection whatsoever. In spite of how badly D&D wanted to sabotage Daenerys and make the audiences hate and despise her, they failed. Daenerys Targaryen's show self remains the face of the franchise and a cultural icon, even years after her butchery and death in the show, and that will never change. Think about how much more beloved she would have been if more of her book self had been adapted. Overall, if I were to rate these seasons in terms of my enjoyment and accuracy for the book, Season 1 was obviously the best. Most of the storyline and most of her personality was preserved. With some glaring omissions, of course, but the essence of the character was there. Season 3 takes the second spot because, while I had problems with many decisions about Dany's portrayal, the glimpses of book Dany were there, especially in the episode written by George. Season 4 would take the bronze medal because, well, at least she chained those dragons and showed any emotional vulnerability. Season 2 was obviously horrible in many aspects, especially the horrible adaptation of The Undying, and Season 5 was so bad that I ranted about it for 3 hours straight. And with that, we conclude this series. Thank you for joining me in this long journey. And if you just tuned in for the last part, well, I guess I thank you for sitting through this one long video anyway. Thanks for watching. Remember that if you like my content, like, subscribe and share, so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video. And remember, Phoenix rises from the ashes, and ashes always are on top.